The wind was sharp that afternoon, cutting through Clara's shawl as she crouched near the fire pit, stirring a pot of thin stew with a wooden spoon so old the grain had smoothed to velvet. Her hands moved methodically, but her mind was frayed with exhaustion. It had taken her the entire morning to dig up a few frost-bitten roots and handful of wild barley from the cracked winter soil. Every scrap of food counted, especially with Ruthie, her 6-month-old baby, lying bundled in an old shawl in a wicker basket nearby. Clara cast a quick glance at her daughter. The baby's cheeks were flushed red from the cold, but she was sleeping peacefully, her tiny fists clenched against her chest. Clara allowed herself a small breath of relief. Just a quiet evening, she told herself, just a warm meal. But the prairie was too still. The sky, pale and endless, offered no warning. The silence wasn't peace, it was pressure, coiling tighter with every second. The birds were quiet, even the wind seemed to pause. Clara didn't like it. She didn't trust quiet. Quiet always came before something terrible. And then, hoofbeats. Clara froze, the spoon trembling in her hand. Her head snapped up. Hoofbeats, not distant like passing riders, but close, too close, hard and fast against the frozen earth. Not again, she thought, panic twisting in her chest. She reached instinctively for the knife she always kept wedged under the folded blanket beside her. Her fingers wrapped around the hilt. Cold with sweat, her heart pounded. Then the horse came into view, riderless. The animal thundered past her camp, reins flapping wild, eyes white with terror. It vanished behind the rise without slowing. Clara stared after it, breath shallow. Something was wrong. Something had gone very wrong. A sound, low and wet, carried through the brush. Clara turned toward it slowly, every muscle rigid. Just past the firelight, where the brush turned to hardpan dirt, a figure lay crumpled on the ground, face down, unmoving. She stood, clutching the knife tight. Her first instinct was to grab Ruthie and run. She'd done it before, fleeing at the first sign of trouble. The land didn't forgive hesitation. But her feet didn't move. Her eyes stayed locked on the stranger. A coat, torn at the shoulder, blood, and on the chest, glinting faintly in the dying light, a badge. A lawman? God, she whispered, why here? The fire crackled behind her, the stew beginning to hiss as it boiled over. Ruthie stirred and let out a tiny sound. But Clara didn't take her eyes off the man. Her fingers tightened on the knife. She stepped forward. Hey, she called, her voice sharper than she meant. You alive? No response. She moved closer, warily, scanning his hands for weapons. Nothing. His left leg was twisted under him unnaturally, and a dark stain soaked through his trousers. His hair was matted with blood and dirt. He looked like he'd been thrown, trampled, maybe even shot. Clara knelt beside him slowly, the fear rising in her throat. She reached out and pressed her fingers to his neck. Her touch was hesitant, but firm. There, a pulse, faint, but there. Damn it, she muttered. She looked back toward the camp. Ruthie, the stew, the fire, her whole world, fragile and barely holding together. And now this stranger, this wounded lawman with blood on his badge and death breathing down his neck. She could leave him. She could walk away and never speak of this. No one would know. But she couldn't do it. Because even with her heart slamming and her brain screaming to run, something deeper, something buried under the hard, quiet years, said no. Not this time. Clara slid her knife back into its sheath. She wedged her shoulder under his arm and heaved. Come on, she grunted. You don't get to die out here. Her back ached. Her knees buckled, but she dragged him inch by inch across the dirt toward her fire. The effort nearly broke her. But she didn't stop until he was beside the flames, his head resting on her folded shawl. You'll die warm, she whispered to him, not cold. The fire's heat met his skin, and his lips twitched. He didn't wake, but he breathed. Clara grabbed another quilt from her basket and draped it over his chest. Then reached for her tin cup and filled it with water. She had no medicine, no salve, no training, but she had stubbornness. And the memory of being left to suffer alone. That wouldn't happen here. She knelt beside the man again, brushing dirt from his forehead. You better not be the kind who gets a woman killed, she murmured, her voice shaking now, because I just threw in with you. And I don't know why. Behind her, Ruthie let out a soft coo, as if sensing the shift. Clara turned and looked at her baby. Then at the man. Then at the horizon. Whatever storm was chasing this Marshal, it had now found her camp. And she had just lit a fire in the dark. One that could be seen from miles away. Eli had been quiet for hours, his fever ebbing and flowing like a tide that refused to recede. Clara sat beside him in the dim light of the fire, wiping the sweat from his brow with the last clean corner of an old cloth. Outside, the wind shifted again, cold and sharp through the cracks in the stone. She hadn't expected him to speak. Not after the pain, not after all that blood. But he did. Clara, he rasped, voice like sand against stone. She leaned closer. Still with me? He nodded faintly, lips cracked, eyes half-lidded but clear. I owe you an answer. You owe me nothing, she said, though her voice betrayed curiosity she couldn't hide. He turned his head, grimacing. They're not after me for gold or gambling debts. Clara, it's worse. She stayed still, steady, let him speak on his own time. I was escorting a prisoner, he said, a girl, 15, maybe less, dirt on her cheeks and a chain around her ankles. She'd been sold, Clara, by people who call themselves ranchers and bankers. Judges. Clara blinked. The words didn't settle immediately. Sold? She was meant for the East. Locked in a freight cart like an animal. They said it was legal. Said it was arranged. I was just the transport. He looked away, shame flickering across his features. But you didn't finish the job. No, he said, almost a whisper. I cut her ropes. Rode with her through the back canyons till I could hide her in a Lakota camp that still takes people in. Told them I'd come back. Told her she'd be safe. And then? They found out. Said I'd betrayed my badge. That I was paid off or soft. That I'd gone rogue. His voice trembled, but not from fever. They started hunting me. Clara didn't speak. Her hands were clenched in her lap. Her breath caught in her throat. The flames crackled, but her mind was louder, whirring. Snapping through pieces of the past she'd locked away. You know who's behind it, she finally said. He nodded slowly. Nathan Briggs. One of them. Probably the one who turned me in. Clara's blood turned to ice. She didn't have to ask again. The name alone hollowed something in her chest. Nathan Briggs. The man who'd vanished the night Ruthie came into the world. Who left her bleeding, screaming in a half-rotted shack with only a rag and a prayer. She hadn't heard his name in over a year. But it hadn't dulled the pain. Or the memory. He's more than just involved. Eli said. He's the one who made the maps. Backtrails. Routes the government never logged. He sold them to traffickers. Turned government work into a market. Clara's fingers tightened around her knees. And the girl? She's alive, he said. I made sure of that. For a long time, Clara said nothing. Her eyes stared into the flames. But her mind saw something else, herself. Younger and bleeding, holding a newborn alone in the dark. The terror, the silence. And now, this man, barely breathing, telling her that the same monster had continued to sell others into that same hell. You could have run, she said softly. I did, Eli admitted, but not fast enough. No, Clara said, rising to her feet. You didn't run. You did the right thing. And they came for you because of it. She turned to face him. Her voice wasn't soft now. It was steady, sharpened by a fire she thought had died long ago. I won't let them finish what they started. His eyes widened. Clara, you fell at my feet with a bullet in your leg and devils behind you. She continued. I didn't ask questions because I thought maybe you were just unlucky. But you weren't. You were brave. Stupid maybe, but brave. She walked to the fire. Stirred the stew with a sharp clatter. Then set the ladle down with finality. They'll come for you, she said. That part doesn't change. But if they think they'll take you without going through me. She looked back over her shoulder. Eyes like steel. Then they haven't met the woman Nathan Briggs left behind. Eli tried to sit up. But the pain flared too strong. You don't have to. I do. She cut in. Her voice cracked, just a hair, but she didn't let it falter. Because when I was the one bleeding, no one came back. When I screamed, the wind was the only one who listened. I know what it means to be left behind. And I'll be damned if I let someone else feel that again. She walked over to him, kneeling beside the quilt and the sweat-soaked pillow. I'm not a soldier, she said. I'm not trained. But I know this land. I know where to hide. Where to watch. Where to strike. Eli stared at her, eyes glistening. You're risking everything, he murmured. Clara looked at Ruthie, still asleep in her basket. Her tiny chest rising and falling with the soft rhythm of safety. No, Clara said quietly. I'm finally protecting something worth it. Eli reached for her hand, just a touch, but Clara let him. For that moment, in the silence between fire crackle and sleeping child, they were no longer strangers stitched together by circumstance. They were something else, a fragile alliance born not from romance or desperation, but from truth, from scars, from survival. And Clara knew, whatever came next, whatever chased them from the shadows of this prairie, she would not run, not this time. The moment Clara saw Nathan Briggs step out from the trees, every bone in her body turned to fire. He wore that same red duster, faded now, but unmistakable, the one he'd had on the night he left her screaming in labor. Alone in a broken-down shed with blood on her thighs and a candle burning low. She didn't flinch, even as his fingers hovered near the grip of his revolver. Even as his voice curled with false charm. Clara stood tall, her knife hidden behind her skirts. Her shoulders squared. Behind her, Eli leaned against the cave wall. Pale but upright, rifle across his lap. Ruthie slept bundled under pine boughs, unaware of the danger her father brought. You live out here now? Nathan asked, mockery in his grin. With a wounded lawman and a bastard child? Clara's jaw clenched. You lost the right to call her anything the day you walked away. Nathan's smile faded. You always did have a mouth. You always had a limp spine. She shot back. He stepped closer. I'm not here to fight you, Clara. I'm here for what's mine. That man in there stole something important. He can hand it over. Or I can take it off his corpse. Either way, you and the brat walk away. Behind her, Eli's voice cut through the tension like a blade. You'll walk away all right. With a bullet in your leg if you don't turn around. Nathan laughed. That badge don't mean much anymore. Marshal, not out here. Clara took a single step forward. Leave, Nathan. You got what you wanted years ago. Don't push your luck. I'll be back by nightfall, he said, pointing at her. With men, you better pray to whatever gods you still believe in. And then he was gone. Clara stood motionless for a moment, her hands shaking, not from fear, but fury. When she turned, Eli had dragged himself upright, bracing on his crutch. You all right? He asked. I'm done running, she said, voice hard as flint. Eli nodded. Then it's time. They left just after sundown. Traveling light, Clara strapped Ruthie to her back, her knife at her waist, and helped Eli onto a saddle. The pain in his leg made him grunt with every movement. But he didn't complain. He knew where they were going. And so did she. The old shed stood beyond a canyon, crumbling and weather-worn, almost swallowed by time. Ivy crawled up the sides. The roof sagged, but it was still there. This was where Ruthie had entered the world, where Clara had cried into the dirt and buried more than pain beneath the floorboards. She kicked loose the rotten planks with her boot, each crack of wood like thunder. Eli lit a lantern, casting long shadows across the ruined space. Clara crouched low, brushing aside leaves and broken glass, fingers digging into the dirt until they struck metal. She pulled out the tin box with both hands, heart thudding. Inside were the relics of betrayal. Nathan's handwriting, promising delivery routes and backdoor trails to traffickers. A badge, dulled and bent, from the first Marshal Nathan had helped destroy. And a ring, gold, simple, the one he gave her 3 days before disappearing. Clara stared at it for a long moment, then snapped the box shut. This is what he's after, she said. Eli's eyes were dark. If we get this to Fort Harland, it's enough to bring down the whole operation. Names, evidence, but we won't make it through the night if he catches us. Clara straightened. Then we don't run, we fight. Eli blinked. You serious? You said it yourself, they're expecting us to hide. Let's give them something to walk into. Back at the cave, they worked in silence. Clara laid out a blanket shaped like a body near the entrance. Eli climbed a ridge above with his rifle, steadying himself between stones. Clara nestled Ruthie deep in the brush, wrapped in her cloak. The child didn't stir. Then Clara crouched behind a fallen log, knife in hand, breath held like a loaded gun. Dusk fell. Then night. The men came. 3 of them. Loud. Laughing. Reeking of confidence. Think she's still warm? One joked. They moved in. The first man never saw her. Clara launched from the shadows. Her knife flashing. He dropped without a sound. Eli fired once. Clean shot. The second man collapsed with a gurgle. The third tried to run. Clara was faster. She tackled him. Her blade pressed to his throat. Tell Nathan, she hissed. Her voice a growl. Next time, I won't leave a throat to carry the message. She let him go. Bloodied and gasping, he scrambled into the dark. They didn't wait. By dawn, Clara and Eli had packed everything and vanished into the hills. Nathan returned to find ruins, a cold fire, a fake body, and a trail that vanished at the ridgeline. He cursed the wind, but it was too late. Clara and Eli rode slow but steady. Ruthie asleep against Clara's chest. The tin box secured in Eli's saddlebag. Their destination, Fort Harland. Their purpose, justice. And Clara? She wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. She was fighting for the girl she used to be. For the child she brought into the world alone. And for the man who'd nearly died doing the right thing. They would bring Nathan's empire down, not with fire. Not with rage, but with truth, with proof, with the will to stand and say, "We are not yours to silence." Eli looked at her as they crested the hill. Golden light rising behind them. You ready? Clara gripped the reins tighter. I've been ready for years. And down the ridge they rode, straight into the reckoning they were about to deliver. The gates of Fort Harland loomed in the distance, tall, stern, and flanked by men in uniform. Clara pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders as their horses approached. The dust trailing behind them like the ghosts of all they had fled. Ruthie slept against her chest. Her tiny weight both an anchor and a reminder. Eli rode beside her, upright but pale, the rifle strapped across his back and the tin box clutched tight in his saddlebag. They were both exhausted, but neither showed it. The soldiers at the gate raised their rifles when they saw them. Eyes wary. State your business. One barked. Eli pulled himself straighter in the saddle. Marshal Eli Creighton, he called out, voice cracked but clear. I'm here to speak with your commanding officer. It's about corruption in the Western Territories. There was a pause. Then one of the soldiers signaled them through. Inside the walls, the fort felt like a different world, tidy, ordered, filled with routines and rules Clara hadn't lived by in years. She kept her eyes ahead, ignoring the curious glances cast their way. Eli dismounted with a groan, leaning on her shoulder for balance. Together, they crossed the yard to the officers' quarters. The captain who met them had gray hair and a permanent scowl. His desk was cluttered with maps, ledgers, and unopened letters. You say you're a marshal, he said, not looking up right away. I was, Eli said, until they stripped my badge for doing the right thing. That made the man glance up. Go on. Eli set the tin box on the desk. Inside is proof of a trafficking operation stretching from Montana to Missouri. Judges, ranch owners, bankers, they've been buying and selling girls like cattle, and silencing anyone who got in the way. This box has a letter from one of the key players, a stolen badge, and a list of routes sold to traffickers by Nathan Briggs. The captain opened the box slowly. His eyes flicked across the letter, then narrowed as he read. Silence settled heavy in the room. Clara stood just behind Eli. Ruthie tucked against her. She said nothing, but her presence filled the space. You willing to testify to this? The captain asked finally, his voice low. Eli nodded. I will. The captain turned to Clara. And you, ma'am? Clara didn't hesitate. She stepped forward. I will. The captain studied her. This Briggs, what's your relation to him? Clara's jaw tightened. He's the man who left me to die in childbirth. And the man who built an empire by destroying others. That was enough. By nightfall, the fort was in motion. Messages were dispatched. Warrants were drawn. Riders galloped from the gates in every direction. Fort Harland had turned into a hornet's nest of justice. Clara and Eli gave their testimonies over the next 2 days. They answered every question, signed every page. Clara's hands didn't tremble once. She recounted everything she knew, the routes Nathan used, the promises he made, the day he vanished. Her voice was steady, her words sharp. Eli gave them the names he'd seen on documents, judges, mayors, ranchers who hid behind reputations while selling lives in secret. Each testimony was like striking a match. And soon, fires burned across the territory. Fort Harland sent out detachments to nearby towns. Ranches were searched, accounts frozen. One judge was arrested while eating supper with his wife. Another tried to flee but was caught at the border. Nathan Briggs, however, vanished. He was too slippery, too well connected, but the web around him frayed fast. His empire, built on silence and fear, began to collapse. The men who once protected him now turned on each other. Testimonies spread. More victims came forward. Clara watched it unfold from a rented room 2 streets from the fort. She didn't like towns, not really, but for now, it was safe. She and Ruthie had a bed, a door that locked, and Eli came every night to sit on the porch and hold the baby until she fell asleep. Some nights, Clara couldn't believe how far they had come, from the freezing plain where a stranger fell at her feet, to this town where justice had finally found a voice. One evening, Eli arrived with a bruised rib and a smile. Another one turned himself in. He said, easing onto the porch rail, "Heard about your testimony. Said if a woman like you could stand up to the devil. So could he." Clara didn't smile, but her eyes softened. "You think they'll get Nathan?" she asked. Eli looked out at the horizon. "One day, men like that can't run forever. Not when truth is chasing them." He reached for her hand, gently, like asking permission. Clara let him take it. "Clara," he said after a pause. "What you did, you didn't have to. Not for me, not for any of it." She turned to him, her voice low but firm. "No, but I needed to. For her, for me, for the girl I used to be before he broke everything." He nodded. "And for the girl you saved." She added, "Who'll never know your name. But we'll sleep safe because you didn't look away." They sat in silence for a while. The fireflies rising, the town quieter than usual. Inside the marshal's office, justice marched forward. Outside, on a wooden porch lit by lamplight, 2 people who had nearly lost everything found something steadier than survival. They found each other, and somewhere in the dark, Nathan Briggs ran, but he no longer had the shadows to protect him. Spring came slowly to the prairie. It didn't announce itself in a grand way. No burst of color or trumpet of birdsong. It arrived in the way warmth creeps into cold bones, quiet, patient, certain. Green returned to the hills in hesitant whispers, and wildflowers, yellow, violet, soft blue, pushed their way through soil that had once known nothing but blood and dust. Near the edge of a quiet ridge just west of Fort Harland, a new cabin stood. It wasn't large. The walls were hand-fitted logs. The roof simple pine slats patched with tar and bark. But it was strong, stronger than the shack Clara had once labored in alone. Stronger than the man who had abandoned her. And stronger, perhaps, than she had ever imagined she could build. Because this time, she hadn't built it alone. Eli had driven every nail with a hand that still bore the scars of healing. He'd carved the doorframe with care, whittled it smooth during long, quiet evenings when Ruthie slept curled against Clara's chest and the prairie winds howled like ghosts too tired to stay. On the front porch stood a wide, low chair, crafted for 3. Pine and patience. Ruthie claimed the center every morning, arms outstretched, demanding a story. Eli told them in a voice rough with dust but soft with love. Tales of stars and coyotes and brave girls with knives sharper than fear. Clara always listened from the doorway, a mug of coffee warming her fingers, never saying a word but hearing every syllable. Some days still felt unreal. The quiet unnerved her sometimes, after so many years of survival, of flight, of vigilance. But this wasn't the silence of danger. It was the kind that wrapped around your shoulders like a quilt. Not emptiness, peace. Eli had been reinstated officially as a marshal a few weeks after the trial. The badge had felt heavier than before. He'd said, not just because of what it represented, but because of what it had nearly cost him. Still, he wore it with a steadiness that didn't waver. But he didn't ride out much anymore. He stayed close to the cabin, close to the hill, close to the women who had saved his life in more ways than one. Some days, he helped clear trails for settlers passing through. Other days, he mended fences or helped Clara dig a garden in the rocky earth behind the house. And every evening, without fail, he returned to the porch before the sun dipped below the horizon. They didn't speak of love much. There were no grand declarations. No carved initials in trees. No promises whispered under moonlight. But every bowl of stew Clara set before him. Every coat he draped across her shoulders when the wind picked up. Every lullaby hummed softly to Ruthie between them, that was love. Quiet, durable, chosen. One morning, as the sky turned gold, Clara watched Eli cradle Ruthie, the child's dark curls tangled against his shoulder, her small hand resting on his collarbone like a seal. "You think they'll come back?" she asked, not needing to clarify who. Eli didn't flinch. "Maybe. Evil doesn't vanish. It hides." He looked at her then, steady, calm, certain. "But if it finds us again, it'll find two people who already walked through fire. And a girl who was born inside it." Clara smiled, slow and tired but true. She walked to him, sat down beside him on the porch bench, her shoulder brushing his. Ruthie stirred in his arms and tugged gently at Clara's braid, giggling. The sound was soft, pure, like a bell ringing far off in the hills. Clara closed her eyes for a moment and breathed. This wasn't the life she'd dreamed of as a girl, it was better. Not perfect, not easy, but real, earned, forged in the same fire that had once threatened to consume her. The townsfolk had begun calling her Mrs. Creighton, though no papers had been signed. She didn't correct them, not because she needed the title, but because the meaning was already there, in the way Eli rose every morning to check on the animals. In the way he kissed Ruthie's forehead each night. In the way he never once asked her to be anyone but herself. Names didn't matter as much as actions. And Eli showed up every single day. Not with flowers or poems, but with quiet eyes, with a steady hand, with a promise that wasn't spoken but lived. That, Clara had learned, was love. Not the kind that burned hot and vanished in the morning, but the kind that stayed. The kind that repaired broken fences and read bedtime stories and sat beside you even when you didn't speak for hours. That night, after Ruthie had fallen asleep beneath a patchwork quilt Clara stitched from old shirts, she stepped outside and lit the lantern on the porch. The stars had come out early. They flickered above her like distant memories, sharp and clear. She stood there for a long time. And she remembered, the girl she used to be. The one who had held a baby with one arm and a knife with the other. The one who had whispered prayers to a ceiling that never answered. The one who had almost given up. And then she thought of the man who had collapsed at her feet. Bleeding and broken. He hadn't just survived, he had stayed. Clara whispered thank you, not to him, not even to herself, but to the fire, because in all its burning and breaking, it had not destroyed her. It had shaped her. And now, she was no longer just surviving. She was home.